Greetings to all of you and welcome to the webinar on transitioning shifting cultivation to resilient farming systems in South and Southeast Asia. This webinar is jointly organized by the Asia Pacific Regional Division and the Environment, Climate, Gender and Social Inclusion Division in IFAD, together with the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. My name is Roshan Cook, and I am the Country Director for Bhutan and Nepal at IFAD, and I will be moderating this webinar today. It gives me great pleasure to moderate this event, especially considering that I was involved in the development of this initiative in 2018, together with Rupert Chowdhury from ICIMOD and Fabrizio Bresciani and Ilva Terzano from IFAD. The reasons for launching this initiative were the following. First, since the end of ICRAF's, that's the World Agroforestry Center's program on alternatives to slash and burn, sometime in the mid-2000s, attention to shifting cultivation had begun to wane globally. Second, although global attention had waned, there still remained a dedicated group of academics led by Malcolm Keynes, who some of you may be familiar with, who continued to research the various aspects of shifting cultivation and had published several anthologies of critical academic work. Rupert Chowdhury, who you will hear from today, was one of those academic/practitioners in this group. Thirdly, IFAD works in hilly areas across the globe, where in many such places, shifting cultivation has been a traditional farming practice. So to bring this all together, IFAD provided a modest grant to ICIMOD for examining the phenomenon of the transitioning of shifting cultivation to sedentary farming. In light of the many environmental, social, and economic changes that have taken place nationally, regionally, and globally over the recent past, we felt that it was time for a stocktake and for developing operational guidelines to assist us when working with communities in mountainous areas that practice shifting cultivation. As part of this initiative, an international symposium was held in 2019 in Guwahati, India, where we brought together around 70 participants to discuss the state of play with regard to shifting cultivation. It was a diverse group of participants consisting of government representatives from the respective South and Southeast Asian countries, field practitioners, academics, project staff, donor agencies, and of course, IFAD and ICIMOD staff. The symposium brought to light approaches and policy measures that have been effective or hold potential for facilitating a transition to sedentary agriculture that ensures food and nutritional security and is also more climate resilient. In addition, that the transition would also safeguard the rights of access to productive resources by marginalized groups such as indigenous people, women, and youth. The symposium generated much of the content for developing the knowledge products that will be presented here today. Let me take this opportunity to thank ICIMOD for all the effort it put into this initiative and for the excellent results that it has generated. Okay, so before I start the session, let me just get into a few housekeeping issues. And Udayan, if you can put up that slide for me, I would appreciate it. It's just loading up. Okay, here you go. So these are the house rules, and I hope you can all see it. Let me just quickly go through it. So to ensure a smooth course of the webinar, speakers are requested to turn their cameras and microphones off at all times and turn them on only when they are speaking. All participants may type in their questions in the chat box at any point in time. Please state your name and affiliation before typing out your questions. Third, do mention the name of the speaker if your question is addressed to a particular speaker. Be short and succinct, of course. Only those questions relevant to the theme of the webinar will be considered. We will try to answer as many questions as we can. However, all of these questions and comments will be, harvested for informing our knowledge further on this topic. During the webinar, if you get disconnected, to rejoin, just please click on the same link which you received in your confirmation email. Thank you, then. Okay, so let me just move into the opening. So without further ado, let me open this up and invite. Okay, let me see. Is it Liam Chikka here or is it Nigel? Liam, are you there?
It's Liam Roshan.
Okay. So unfortunately, the director for the Asia Pacific region, Nigel Brett, had to step out for an important meeting, and so Liam Chikka, our regional lead portfolio advisor for the Asia Pacific region, will deliver the opening remarks on behalf of Nigel. Over to you, Liam, and the opening remarks are to address why managing shifting cultivation is important to IFAD. Over to you, Liam.
Thank you very much, Roshan. Thanks for the introduction. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to deliver these opening remarks on behalf of IFAD today. As Roshan just mentioned, our regional director, Nigel Brett, is tied up in a meeting with board members, and he has asked me to step in. Pleasure in particular to see Dr. Pema today. I believe we last met a few years back on the occasion of an IFAD Governing Council session here in Rome. This is maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. Moving on to today's agenda. So IFAD, of course, and its partners remain fully committed to supporting more sustainable agriculture and food systems in Asia, particularly in South and Southeast Asia. We are 100% committed to enhancing the resilience, the inclusiveness, as well as food and nutrition security of small-scale farmers. Of course, the situation following COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the drivers which are behind some of the challenges and the most pressing challenges facing agricultural and food systems. And the pandemic has also created a new sense of urgency for transformational change. Have joined in the international effort to respond to the pandemic. Perhaps some of you are familiar with IFAD's Rural Poor Stimulus Facility, the RPSF, which has been deployed as an immediate response to support and build the resilience of the rural poor and small-scale producers during these challenging times. Now, based on IFAD's core mandate of investing in rural poor people and enabling inclusive and sustainable transformation of rural areas, IFAD is currently pursuing 3 main strategic objectives. And one of these objectives, of course, is to strengthen the environmental sustainability and climate resilience of poor rural people's economic activities. This objective, of course, is very relevant to today's discussion. If we bear in mind that approximately 280 million hectares of land are under shifting cultivation globally, with approximately 110 million hectares in Asia alone, this strategic objective becomes extremely relevant. Billions of people in upland areas of South and Southeast Asia still depend on shifting cultivation for their livelihoods, for their nutrition, for their food security. And an estimated 200 million people in Asia are reported to be dependent on forest-based agriculture, including, of course, shifting cultivation. So the goal of achieving sustainable agricultural development in upland and forested areas of Asia remains a challenge for us, for the development community. All too often, we hear negative press. Many of us are familiar with regular articles highlighting issues such as deforestation, the degradation of land, soils, of the environment in general. And the alternatives to shifting cultivation or shifting agriculture are also not without challenges of their own. Bearing in mind that in the last 30 or 40 years, it's been documented that policy-driven attempts of transforming shifting cultivation into settled agriculture have often led to the emergence of multiple challenges. One of these is loss of dietary diversity. In some cases, we've also seen decline ecosystem services and agrobiodiversity. And we've observed cases where local communities have had their land tenure security compromised. This has led in some cases to landlessness, to poverty, to rising marginalization of indigenous and minority groups who have traditionally practiced shifting cultivation in this region. And as these marginalized groups are IFAD's primary target groups, the subject matter, of course, becomes of great importance too. So faced with this difficult situation, it's time to act now, and it's time to act with innovative technology and practices by shifting cultivators. We need improved management approaches, better policy frameworks for governing and transformation of shifting cultivation. We need approaches that maintain dietary diversity, that reduce malnutrition, that guarantee tenure security, that maintain forest cover, of course, and that generate ecosystem services. If left unaddressed, well, then the current status quo will only lead to further marginalization of shifting cultivators and further impoverishment, compromising the resilience of farmers as well as that of their food systems and the immediate environment supporting their livelihoods. Clearly, I'm a firm believer that this we simply cannot afford. We should not let this happen at all. Now, in view of the upcoming UN Food Systems Summit, this is the time to take stock of the knowledge related to such an important topic and to its ancillary and pressing challenges. With this, Roshan, if you allow, I'd like to suggest that we'd hand over to Dr. Pema for a few remarks from their side. Over to you, Roshan.
Thank you very much, Liam, for those very important points you raised. And yes, let me hand over to Dr. Pema Jamsho, the Director General of the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. Over to you, Pema.
Okay. Good morning to IFAD colleagues in Rome and elsewhere. I understand, Roshan, you are in The Hague, and some of your colleagues may be elsewhere. And I also would like to say good afternoon for everyone in the region and from my colleagues from ICIMOD. Udayan, can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, Dr. Pema.
Yeah, okay. So I'm very happy to be back with so many friends from IFAD whom I had the privilege of working with earlier. During my earlier reincarnation, I think I met Roshan a few times, and of course, as Liam mentioned, I was attending some of the IFAD Governing Council meetings. But I was involved with IFAD even long before that, when I was heading the Policy and Planning Department of the Ministry of Agriculture in Bhutan. And in that capacity, I also worked very closely with Nigel and his team in developing several programs that I think are still running in Bhutan. So my association, personal association with IFAD goes a long way. But also when I was working in ICIMOD sometime from 2003 to 2006, then that was the time when the work on shifting cultivation, collaboration between IFAD and ICIMOD was just picking up, and Drupat just started at ICIMOD working on this very important subject. So in many ways, I'm quite familiar with this program that, today we had the privilege of presenting the resource book and the policy brief. Now, I think this is a time to also reflect on, the thinking that was there then. Perhaps, we did not really look at it from a multi-dimensional perspective. Perhaps many governments and at the same time many academics and research bodies thought looked at it from a forester's point of view or an agronomist's point of view, and from economics of increasing productivity. And perhaps we didn't give so much attention from the perspective of ethnobotanist, anthropologist, or even ecologist, and now increasingly climatologist, if you like. Now, that was basically with good intention, and I think there was a lot of energy put into to save forests and to avoid sort of soil erosion and landslides that in very steep areas are actually precipitated by shifting cultivation. But this is not the case everywhere, and perhaps I think our sort of generalization of the system, led to us looking at shifting cultivation looking at shifting cultivation in a more negative way. I am now happy to note that we have evidence to show that shifting cultivation is more than just slash and burn agriculture, but have significant bearings on culture and tradition, as we just heard from Liam, and for use rights, food security, biodiversity conservation, carbon sequestration, and all these aspects. And you know that when once we convert shifting cultivation system into a permanent agriculture, the first thing that we see are fences. And these fences not only protects the crops from domestic or wildlife predation, but also cuts them off from access for grazing or for collecting of edible plants, or even cuts off the access of wildlife to water sources and so on. So there are so many things that perhaps we didn't look at that time. Today, as we meet here virtually for launching this event today, it is an opportune time to reflect on how we can reset our approach, not only with looking at shifting cultivation, but also at sustainable development goals and climate change mitigation and adaptation measures as a whole. We have been living with the challenge of a global pandemic for the past year, as we all know, and we are now still in the middle of the pandemic. But at the same time, the climate crisis is just simply becoming more serious, and we have just about a decade's time to achieve both the sustainable development goals set by the Agenda 2030 and the climate commitments agreed upon at COP21 in Paris. The pandemic, as we all know, has resulted in serious setbacks to the progress that we have made till now, be it in terms of poverty reduction, as well as in meeting the other SDGs, such as reducing hunger, providing access to clean drinking water, clean energy, income, and employment. Now, we must not only play catch up and make up for the setbacks, but we must shift gears to double our efforts to ensure that the climate and Agenda 2030 goals are met in time. We know that we cannot do this alone, but must come together to forge strong partnerships to strive to keep global temperatures to well below 2 degrees centigrade. And for this region, in the Himalayas, even a 1.5 degrees centigrade is going to be too hot. And we have to work together to build adaptation capacities and resilience of the vulnerable and marginalized, and to achieve the SDG targets and ensure that no one is left behind. I think Liam has mentioned all of this earlier, so I will not stress any further on this. Now, for ICIMOD, poverty alleviation, resilience building, and sustenance of the ecosystem services are impact areas of our strategic framework. We have heard from Liam, that environmental sustainability and climate resilience are at the core of IFAD's work, and I think there is very good convergence between our two organizations' priorities as such. Now, this together with climate action will continue to be at the core of our work as we move towards our fifth medium-term action plan. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region, as you all know, is widely acknowledged to be one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change impacts, with increasing frequency and intensity of disasters and changing weather patterns that further threaten the safety and security of mountain communities. The mountain areas still have much higher rates of poverty, standing at around 30% as compared to the plains areas, more food insecure, and also a high level of malnutrition. As we know, mountain communities are largely agrarian, dependent on agriculture and livestock for their sustenance, and therefore any tangible impact on their socio-economic well-being must consider interventions and innovations in these sectors. In the Himalayas, a large proportion of the mountain communities are dependent on subsistence agriculture, and in the eastern Himalayas, this is predominantly the practice of shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation still persists. You also heard that from Liam in northeast India, in the Chottagam hill tracts of Bangladesh, large parts of the uplands of Myanmar, as well as most uplands of Southeast Asia. I'm happy to see that there are several participants from Myanmar as well as from Bangladesh attending this webinar. Shifting cultivators are largely indigenous people belonging to ethnic minorities. They lack political access and voice, and consequently are some of the most marginalized communities in the region. It is needless to mention that these communities are highly vulnerable to change, climate, and socioeconomic, and therefore deserves our full attention. It is also worth noting that over the past decades, successive governments have strived to introduce alternative options to shifting cultivation in order to usher in agriculture development and improve livelihoods for such communities. The results, however, have not been satisfactory, and shifting cultivation persists across much of the eastern Himalayas. Ironically, as the resource book being released today highlights, efforts at transformation of shifting cultivation have resulted in second-generation issues, depletion of agrobiodiversity with implications on food and nutrition security, insecurity of tenure, with a rise in landedness and such, so on and so forth. For ICIMOD, these are core issues, and we move forward. As we move forward, our efforts will be directed towards addressing these challenges. The resource book and accompanying policy briefs suggest several solutions in addressing the second generation issues. Working with partners is central to ICIMOD's functioning for fostering ownership and nurturing approaches that are sustainable, long-term, and effective. This also helps in taking our work to scale and in our endeavor to improve the well-being of mountain communities, particularly of those marginalized ones, such as the shifting cultivators. I would like to invite IFAD to join hands with ICIMOD as we have done in the past. A partnership between IFAD and ICIMOD, particularly the country portfolios have been extremely fruitful in the past, and there is no reason why this should not be the case in the future. IFAD loan projects can draw from the wide range of solutions developed by ICIMOD programs to address specific challenges in adaptation, resilience building, and poverty reduction. As already proven, the partnership between our two organizations can strengthen the voice of marginalized mountain communities and effectively engage in policy advocacy for the vulnerable mountain poor. At the Global Forum, you could join in raising the voice of mountain communities to push for urgent climate actions. Together, let us strive to ensure that no one is left behind as we move towards 2030. In conclusion, I would like to thank all those involved in this long collaborative program, and particularly in putting this resource book and policy briefs together. In particular, I also like to mention Nigel and the team at IFAD, and of course for this particular for products, Roshan and his team, and Drupat and other colleagues from ICIMOD for a job well done. Thank you, and wish the webinar a very fruitful deliberation and very successful launching of the books. Thank you very much. Over to you, Roshan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pema Jamsho, for those inspiring opening remarks. I would also like to acknowledge that Isabella Koziel, the Deputy Director General of ICIMOD, also has joined us. And now we have 100 participants who have logged on, and I noticed in some of the names in the of the participants, And I noticed that some of them were actually participants in the symposium, in the international symposium. So that is really good to see your presence. And we're looking forward to seeing your comments and questions in the chat. Okay, now if I can move to the technical session itself, let me call upon Dhrupad Chowdhury, ICIMOD's Chief on Scaling Operations, to present on the challenges in transitioning, shifting cultivation to settled agriculture, addressing the second generation issues of transition. I just want to also take this opportunity to thank Dhrupad for his incredible effort that he put into this work, and really bringing this to a very good conclusion, and having these knowledge products, fully elaborated and giving us a way forward on addressing this issue. Over to you, Dhrupad. Thank you.
Okay.
Could you put the presentation on
Full screen mode?
On full screen? Yeah, thank you. And Dhrupad, since we're running a bit short on time, I hope you can keep your intervention very, very short. Thank you.
Is the presentation on full screen now? Can you see that?
No. Udayan,
Okay.
can you put up the presentation?
No, I'm just putting it on.
Yes.
Just give me a minute.
Put it on slideshow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roshan. I have, changed the title of my slide of my presentation slightly, and instead of talking on the challenges of transformation, I would like to focus on the reasons why the second generation issues emerge. Because when you look at the challenges faced for transformation, the main challenges are avoiding the pitfalls that arise because of these second generation issues. So I would focus more on how and why these second generation issues emerge. All right. Management of shifting cultivation has been enigmatic and, for most of the governments, a big challenge across continents, perceived as primitive, economically unviable, and a cause for tropical deforestation and environmental destruction. Governments have sought to replace the practice with settled agriculture, promoting wet terraces for staple security, cash crops for income generation, but ironically never considering promoting products from shifting cultivation. And as a result, there have been several, negative fallouts, mainly resulting in a distortion of shifting cultivation, with shortened cycles arising because of the increasing land use pressure, marginalizing farms and reducing productivity of those farms, depleting agrobiodiversity and forest cover as monocultures of cash crops replace shifting cultivation fields, and the fallows, the regenerating fallows, arresting the progression to forests. Also, such an approach has diluted traditional institutions and customary norms, together compromising food, nutrition, and tenurial security and degrading ecosystem services. So where have we gone wrong? What was wrong, or what were the follies that we had in this approach, which has brought us to this present situation? Well, for one, the approaches for transformation overlooked or ignored the rich agrobiodiversity that you get in shifting cultivation. The mixed cropping allows sequential harvesting, ensuring seasonal food availability, dietary diversity, and therefore strengthening food and nutritional security. The agrodiversity also is an effective risk aversion strategy, which is essential for resilience building. And this is important not just for the shifting cultivators, but for the world at large, because when we look at a climate crisis and a climate impacted world, what we require are stress tolerant crops. And the agrobiodiversity in shifting cultivation are building blocks for developing such stress tolerant crops, and hence essential for global food and nutritional security. Transformatory approaches have also ignored customary norms governing shifting cultivation, forgetting that shifting cultivation functions under a common property framework, which gives universal access to land, ensuring tenurial rights which are inherited but non-transferable, thereby safeguarding collective ownership. As transformations take place, these are diluted and distorted, and transitions actually result in de facto privatization of land, depriving access rights of the poor, and very often giving rise to landlessness and the emergence of tomorrow's poor. But what is more important is that such approaches fail to recognize that shifting cultivation is not just an agricultural practice, but a sequential agriculture and forest management practice done on the same plot of land separated in time and practiced at the landscape level. This oversight pushes the replacement of fallows with settled agriculture, resulting in a permanent land use and land cover change and causing depletion of forest cover and ecosystem services. Fallows in shifting cultivation are the backbone of the practice. And if you look at a shifting cultivation landscape, it is a mosaic of agricultural fields, regenerating fallows, and mature forests. Science tells us that young fallows have potential to capture carbon at faster rates, thus offsetting the carbon lost during burning in shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation landscape, therefore, could be potentially carbon sinks and hence help in mitigation of global warming and climate change. Approaches which are insensitive to these attributes, the dual land use, the crop diversity, and the customary tenurial norms in shifting cultivation actually give rise to second generation issues. And they become part of the problem threatening poor people's access to land and tenure security, thus marginalizing shifting cultivations further. So what should we do? Should transitions be stopped? Well, no, but then given that most of shifting cultivation is becoming distorted with very shortened cycles, not allowing the regeneration and reversion to forests, considering that communities aspire for change and want to assimilate within the development pathways, and also that the youth are fast losing their interest in such agricultural systems, we have to revisit and revise our approach for transformations. And as pointed out earlier by Liam and by Dr. Pema, we have got to realize that there are a lot of strengths in shifting cultivation, and therefore transitions that we take now must complement indigenous food systems. They must respect customary tenure norms, blend traditional practices with the modern, and accommodate the coexistence of indigenous food systems. Above all, they must allow an organic evolution and adaptation of the transformation process. If we don't do that, we tend to threaten and compromise attaining some of the SDG goals. The SDG 1 on poverty, 2 on hunger, 5 on gender equity, 13 on climate change, and 15 on sustainable use of ecosystems. And many of the targets within this are going to be affected, and we won't be able to achieve them if we continue on the same path as we are doing now. So what is the way forward? Well, this is where the knowledge products which are going to be launched today become very relevant and very useful. Today, we would be launching the resource book and guideline and 4 policy briefs. The resource book, apart from the fact that it highlights the impacts of transitions on second generation issues, actually gives an account of the practice of shifting cultivation and the customary norms under which it functions. 3 of its chapters focus on second generation issues of food and nutritional security, of safeguarding ecosystem services, and of tenure. And these chapters actually provide solutions and recommendations which are drawn from across South and Southeast Asia, drawing on community innovations on traditional practices and introductions of very innovative interventions by projects, by development projects. More importantly, the resource book also offers a framework of transition that is respectful of indigenous food systems and allows the blending of tradition with the new. The 4 policy briefs, which will be talked about later in the program, focus on individual second generation issues, but one of them, which I'm just briefly going to touch on, talks on why quantifying the extent of shifting cultivation is difficult. One of the challenges is that the different diverse land use and land cover, which results in a mosaic of shifting cultivation landscapes, are not captured in ongoing efforts for quantification of land use and land cover because of the complexities and the lack or the inadequacy of existing land use and land cover classification. And this policy brief suggests that there is a need for revisiting and revising this land use classifications. And I hope that most of these the knowledge products will be useful for development practitioners, for policymakers, as well as the shifting cultivators and the communities who work for the betterment of upland communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Drupad, for that very thoughtful presentation, highlighting the changes that are taking place on the ground and how we should, engage with those changes. Let me now move to Marie-Aude Evans. She's IFAD Senior Technical Specialist in Agronomy, working with the Sustainable Production Markets and Institutions Division. That's the PMI division. And she's going to speak a little bit on the resource book, Transitioning Shifting Cultivation to Resilient Farming Systems in South and Southeast Asia. Over to you, Marie-Aude. And since we're running a little bit behind time, I would appreciate if you could keep your intervention succinct. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much. So yes, I won't repeat then the initial introductions that a lot of IFAD loads are actually taking place in shifting cultivation context. I would like just to talk about my personal experience in 2 projects. I mean, I'm the regional agronomist, as it's been introduced. So actually 8 of the projects I am supervising or supporting are intervening in such context. And I was lucky enough 2 years ago to be part of this shifting cultivation workshop and discussing with different practitioners. And it opened my eyes on a number of the challenges and issues that we are discussing today. And since then, we've been collaborating with Drupad. We organized together with various organizations side event at COP14 2 years ago in Delhi. And we've been collaborating ever since. So even though the operational guidelines was not released, I've been using part of this framework and pillars of interventions in the missions we've been having. So I would like to showcase now that we have the manual, how I think it can be used in design and in support mission. So my first example will be on Myanmar. Myanmar, we are supporting 2 different investments which have part of the areas intervening in shifting cultivation context. And notably, they are trying to address some of the second generation challenges we've been mentioning. notably the issue of erosion, deforestation, and how it impacts landslides and siltation of infrastructure downstream. So that was one of the entry points for the government, as well, of course, as the livelihood, nutrition, and poverty of the population. The project design was promoting participatory land use planning, some land tenure arrangement, but more in the lowland, and notably to address this erosion, an agronomic package, which is called SALT, on sloping agricultural land terracing options and sustainable land management. But there was a lot of different issues and questions on the design and the intervention. So the country director brought us a mixed team. So actually we were the three intervenants from IFAD, me, Harold, and Antonella were together in a mission last year to try to see what the issues. And what I can see is that the design didn't consider sufficiently what Drupa had exposed early on and what the operational guidelines tries to address. On one hand, first, the project was trying to promote these agronomic practices, is SALT, but we didn't have really a clear idea of where it would be implemented and who could adopt. And actually, they didn't have a good understanding of this dual land use and the use of the fallow and the different land tenure regime. So people that we are trying to, when promoting this itinerary, then we don't know whether the farmers even have a long-term user right, whether they can crop 1 year and continue the next year, and what are the land tenure arrangements. So we worked together with Harold on trying to bring together better the land tenure regime understanding and understanding what can be the options and how we can work with the communities to understand and grant longer term tenure right of the community to be able to manage the land as they want in the forest. Second, the options first, there was one package of options of what we can do in terms of these agronomic practices, but this approach was not sufficiently considering indigenous practices, biodiversity of varieties, nutrition, and so on. So Antonella, who will present the nutrition side, we worked together to try to identify what can be alternative crop choice, how we can identify and review the nutrition values of the different species used in the forest and in others. And finally, on the agronomic side, building on this understanding and the different options provided on the operational guidelines, we try to provide a more open basket of options, including how the farmers can improve fallow and introduce additional species, how they can better manage fertility into the shifting cultivation system, and how we can adopt a more community-driven innovation process. So all this, I can see that the operational guidelines, if we had it, that could have been addressed a bit better at design. And then that provides really good entry point to analyze the issues, considering both land tenure, nutrition, and the need to have these ecosystem services, biodiversity of options, and a community-driven approach. So I can really see the operational element of how I can use in design and in implementation. My second example is on the design. I'm currently involved in a new design in Laos, which takes place in an environment of shifting cultivation in upland forest. And this is a nutrition focus project, which is trying to address the issues, the second generation issues of loss of nutrition diversity and seasonal nutrition, because the forests are getting degraded, the access are constrained, and the shifting cultivation systems are threatened. So the farmers, the nutrition is impacted this way. But the initial phase was mostly focused on agriculture. So now in this new phase, because we have this better awareness of this nexus between agriculture, forest, nutrition, and climate change, we are trying to bring the role of forest and the issues of shifting cultivation and challenge into the project, so that we can better understand what is the role of the forest and the different shifting cultivation practices in nutrition, and bring up interventions that can address this root cause. And the operational guidelines provide a menu of useful options that we could use. So all in all, as I have to be short, I think that provides some illustration of how these operational guidelines help us change our lens and the way we see things, to adopt more a systemic view that can try to see and understand the link between nutrition and agronomy and ecosystem services, and the important understanding of land tenure, to design interventions and to backstop implementation. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mariot, for that excellent presentation. We're running really behind time, so I'm just going to ask if we could extend this session by about 15 minutes, and I hope you can bear with us on that. Now we'd like to launch the resource book, and Udayan, if you can put up the slide of the resource book, and if I think Nigel has joined us now. Nigel, if you can unmute yourself, and also Pema, if you can unmute yourself. Once the slide is up, we can launch it. This is a bit of a bizarre situation. I've never done a virtual launch of a document, but let's see how this works.
Right.
Udayan, can you put up the?
Roshan, I understand Nigel is experiencing some problems connecting. He can hear us, but he cannot access video, nor can he speak. So
yes, yes, Roshan. Yes, Roshan. So I've shared the slide. Do you see the slide now on the screen?
Yes, we do. Yes.
But yes, unfortunately, we've been trying to put him in the speakers panel. We were getting a little bit of technical difficulty, so he's not able to actually be in the speakers panel right now.
No problem, Udayan. So Liam, if you can do the honors. So over to you, Dr. Pema and Liam, for launching the resource book and our policy briefs.
So,
great.
Yeah, we just click on it, is it?
I think you can say, with this we launch the launch the documents.
It's a pleasure to launch this very important, the knowledge products, the resource book, and the policy briefs. Thank you to all those who have been instrumental in bringing this out. So, Liam?
I second what Dr. Pema just said. It's a pleasure to launch the resource book on transitioning, shifting cultivation to resilient farming systems. So with this, do we click? I mean, I did click,
excellent.
But nothing's
No, with this we launch this the resource book and the policy briefs.
A round of applause. Yeah.
Yes, you can use the emoticons for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And just to inform all the participants, we will be making this available on the different platforms of ICIMOD and IFAD. But if you need an advanced copy, please write to us and we'll be more than happy to share this documentation with you. Okay, great, thank you. Now let's move on to the next speaker. Let me bring in Harold Liversedge. He's IFAD's lead technical specialist in land tenure, also from the PMI division. And he'll speak on supporting Myanmar's land governance reforms. Over to you, Harold.
Thanks very much, and thank you for this opportunity to say a few words. Quite a tough act to follow, Drupad, Mariord and others. But I thought I'd start with a bit of a broader perspective on how IFAD addresses tenure and then come back to the work done on tenure in Myanmar. IFAD recognizes the importance of equitable access to land and tenure security for our investments and development outcomes more generally. For us, though, tenure security refers not only to formal recognition of land rights, rather it refers to the diverse range of rights from community or group to familial and individual rights that determine the access of and use of land and the associated natural resources such as water, forests, rangelands and fisheries. Almost all of our investments, the investments that we support are grappling with tenure issues in one way or another. Typically, the measures we support are integrated into broader agriculture and rural development projects or programs. Often the investments we make in tenure measures is quite modest, but we've learned that they have a critical outcome for the overall investment and in particular for social inclusion. And as we've already heard, one issue we often grapple with is how investments in promoting rural transformation may impact not only on the tenure systems, but more broadly on the farming and food systems and livelihoods. And this is particularly true, I think, in upland communities that are dependent on forest resource sources, especially in Southeast Asia, but also in Latin American parts of Africa. And then one country, as Mariord has already mentioned, one such country that is grappling with this is Myanmar, where IFAD is supporting the promotion of environmentally sustainable modernization of agriculture in degraded sloping areas. And this includes investments in agroforestry and sustainable harvesting of forest products, rehabilitating productive infrastructure in ways that maximize the sustainable use and outputs of natural resource base, and also forging paths ways for communities to transition from subsistence to more commercial livelihoods through access to inputs, knowledge and services. This is being supported in more remote upland communities in the eastern western parts of the country, with a high predominance of diverse ethnic minorities, each with diverse systems of customary land and natural resource governance and tenure, and practicing a mix of shifting and permanent cultivation. One thing I learned is really to appreciate the diversity in these systems and the difference between areas closer to town and in more remote areas. As you may know, customary tenure is not adequately recognized in Myanmar's policy and legal framework, and there have been challenges with people losing their access to land and natural resources, with land being allocated to large investors from outside of the community. However, there is a growing acknowledgement of the importance of customary tenure and the associated farming systems. And IFAD was asked by its government partners to insist in developing new approaches that could support both the recognition of customary tenure and farming systems, while at the same time promoting their sustainable and inclusive development. It is for this reason that we decided to focus on Myanmar for the work done by ICIMOD on tenure. And as such, we think that Chapter 4 of the guidelines and the associated policy brief provided an excellent analysis of the challenges being faced. I certainly learned a lot in terms of the history and possible approaches and solutions for addressing these challenges, including, for example, the importance of recognizing collective rights of communities over their shifting cultivation lands, including woodlands, the recognition that no land is essentially vacant that can be allocated to outside investors without, as a minimum, a prior consultation and full agreement from the concerned communities, following the principle of free, prior and informed consent. But more fundamentally, that the focus should be on the investment by and for these communities. And finally, that the individual tenure rights of households or families should be governed by customary tenure arrangements. In general, we think that the guidelines offer a practical set of recommendations for strengthening not only the policy and legal framework governing customary tenure, but also for undertaking participatory land use and local economic development planning processes that will put the concerned communities at the center of decisions over their development. We believe that the tools will be essential not only for IFAD's investments in Myanmar, but also for the country at large and other countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa that are grappling with similar issues. So I'd like to just join others in thanking ICIMOD for the work done in developing the guidelines and policy briefs. And on a personal level, I'd like to sincerely thank Drupad for his insights and ideas. I've certainly learned a lot, and I think that the work he and ICIMOD have done will make an important contribution to addressing the challenges faced in fostering inclusive development for the communities that we're working with. I hope those are my few words, and yes, thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Harold, for being very succinct and dealing with a rather contentious issue of land tenure. Thank you very much for those insights. Let me quickly move on to Antonella Cordone. She's the Senior Technical Specialist in Nutrition, and she's with the Environment, Climate, Gender and Social Inclusion Division, ECG. She's going to speak on ensuring seasonal food availability and dietary diversity during and after transition of shifting cultivation systems to settled agriculture. This is on that policy brief. Over to you, Antonella.
Thank you, and thank you very much. Thank you to my predecessors who have said it all. So it's not easy to come after them, but let me try to bring a different angle and a different perspective, and also to ensure that the message goes clear on the importance of these tools now. And as Drupad well said, we are dealing with the second generation challenges. But why are we there today? Because back 64 years ago in 1957, FAO decided and declared that shifting cultivation was the most serious land use problem in the tropical world. And this is the origin, let's say, of the difficulties that indigenous peoples, who are those who inhabit the uplands, have been facing for the past 60 years and more. But eventually, as Drupad well said, there has been a shift, and scientists have shown that shifting cultivation, when practiced sustainably, is an important livelihood system. And this is also the angle I wish to bring. We have heard that shifting cultivation is still in place in many parts of the world, and this also shows the resilience of indigenous peoples. I remember a 90-year-old indigenous leader in Indonesia who told me, our forests are our supermarkets. They are our pharmacies, and not only for us, but for humanity in general, and we need to protect them. And the COVID pandemic also has shown the resilience of these systems, both in their governance structure, social cohesion, and ability to cope with stresses. But let me give some highlights of the policy brief. I will not go into details because I'm sure you will be curious to go and read in detail. Now, what the policy brief on ensuring seasonal food availability and dietary diversity during and after transition of shifting cultivation system highlights. And let me say that once more, I think IFAD and ICIMOD particularly are a bit at the cutting edge, because we are not shining away from the challenges that are happening on the ground and that we face, as Marie-Aude highlighted, in designing and implementing development projects. And what does this policy brief highlights? It highlights that despite holding the promise to food security, improved nutrition, enhanced income, and reducing environmental depletion, the establishment of terraces and plantations replacing shifting cultivation has actually resulted in large-scale land use change and the consequent erosion of the diverse resource base that upland communities, in majority indigenous peoples, are dependent upon for their food security, for their nutritional needs, and often this has resulted in poverty and increased malnutrition, particularly micronutrient deficiencies, or as it is also referred to, the hidden hunger. But why does this happen? In shifting cultivation, communities are able to cultivate up to 50 different species that are the sources of their micronutrients. And when we move to settled agriculture, this is reduced at 5 if we are lucky. And the policy brief also shows and highlight the case in Laos, where, for instance, the relocation of villages to lowlands, the inadequate and insufficient land of paddy cultivation, and the limiting rotational agriculture to 3 plots have severely affected the productivity, increasing food insecurity, malnutrition, and poverty. We are at the eve of the Food System Summit, as Liam was highlighting. So what are the messages here? The approaches for transition from shifting cultivation to settled system need to be revisited. And this is what the entire toolkit is pointing to. Sustainability in shifting cultivation needs to be supported and valued. But when the transition is there, we need to manage the transition, and we need to support governments, indigenous to manage the transition. And the message that we wish to convey is that there is no system that can replace the sustainability of shifting cultivation, not only as a mere production system, but as a livelihood systems, where the system is the pivot around which annual work and ritual cycles revolve, and it is an intricate part of indigenous people's way of life and closely tied to their cultural identity and spirituality. The role of indigenous women is crucial in shifting cultivation, and this needs to be assessed very well in the transition, because their role change within the family in moving towards settled agriculture. And we have seen that more and more they are marginalized when settled agriculture becomes cash crop and becomes money, and where indigenous women lose their role and their power, and the knowledge of indigenous women needs to be valued in any change and transformation. Their knowledge of the environment, their knowledge of the species, their knowledge, their role in keeping seeds and in transferring the knowledge to the next generations. And these are the opportunities that organizations like IFAD and ICIMOD need to build on. These are the untapped potential that upland communities bring, where tradition and technology can be blended. And we as technical specialists, as development practitioners, as researchers, as policymakers, we need to be humble when we enter these communities.
Antonella,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think if you can wrap up in 2 seconds, that would be really good. Thank you.
Yeah. That is my wrap up. Is the humility we approach, is the opening, when the open mind when we are in communities to first learn what is the basis of their diets, and then select options with them where communities are leading in any process of transformation. Over.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for those excellent points that you raised. We're behind time, so I'm going to ask Marie-Aude to be very brief. If you can just quickly cover in 2 minutes the issues around the transitioning of shifting cultivation to sedentary agriculture and the implications on ecosystem services. Over to you, Marie-Aude.
Thank you. Yes, I'll make it short. I think Drupad and all the colleagues have already talked enough about the main secondary challenge raised by promoting terraced or sedentary agriculture and shortening following shifting cultivation. The main issue is to, like, the main point of the policy brief is to showcase that when we transform shifting cultivation in settled agriculture, then a proportionate area of forest is permanently lost. So in the end, we negate the sustainable conservation of forest, which is part of shifting cultivation. And that, of course, has impact on the regularity of the ecosystem services and reduced diversity services and carbon sequestration. On the other hand, when to maintain forest cover, people put monocropping forest, we also reduce the biodiversity and ecosystem services. So we need to design programs that can ensure really sustainable transition and that look at sustaining the ecosystem services and build on community innovations. So the policy brief, I'll just present actually the main entry point that I propose in the policy brief in the operational guidelines. And I think they are very practical and useful for project design and implementation. One, the first step is to just help the farmers, instead of shifting directly to sedentary measures, but how can he continue cultivating in a plot longer than 1 year? How can we address the fertility issue, the pest and management issue that arise once you cultivate more for 1 year? How can you add some crops and trees that can then accelerate the regeneration of the fallow and the forest, some specific species? How do you blend traditional practices with new innovative approach to improve soil health and ecosystem services? How do you choose agroforestry and tree farming and practice a multi-tiered cropping system in this area that mimic the shifting cultivation system and can provide options for nutrition along the year? So these are a set of options. And also, you have to intervene in different parts of the landscape, in the new shifting cultivation area, in the fallows, and also help the communities put in place community conserved areas, in areas which are specifically need to be conserved or natural forest, but with the proper encouragement of payment for environmental services and also allowing the population to actually collect the non-forest timber products or others without damaging the forest. So this kind of approach we use, for instance, in the project in India. So we really address the different parts of the ecosystem. But what is important, and was also put in the policy brief, is that all these agroecologic options need to be combined with a strong disengagement of traditional institutions and land tenure and community elders, because you can't increase simply the duration of cultivation technically. Farmers and households need to have a longer view of tenure security, so you need to negotiate with the traditional authority how this can be extended, and how you work on the governance mechanism, how you strengthen it to also include gender consent, prevent elite capture, and reflect with the communities on the best options that can sustain ecosystem services while preserving livelihoods. So this is the main content of this policy brief, and I think this is really tremendously useful for project design and implementation. Over.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mario. That was very succinct. We haven't had much. We haven't had many questions in the chat. There have been several points raised about wanting to partner, etc., which we will take into consideration. So we're copying this, and we will look at this. But there was one question I'd like to bring to the fore, which was raised by Vincent Dalong, who is a former IFAD staff member who worked on the India country program for many years, also supporting Bhutan and other countries. And he's now at the Martin Luther Christian University in Shillong. So good to hear from you, Vincent. And he's asking us the question: how do you transform policy recommendations and take them to communities? Maybe if I can put this to Drupad. Could you say a few words on that, Drupad?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Roshan. Thanks, Vincent, for that question. I think if you look at the publications, what we have, both the resource book as well as the policy briefs, both of them have very practical recommendations in terms of how things can be taken forward. The policy briefs, of course, focused, or they are targeted towards policymakers. But then the recommendations which are proposed are for bringing about changes in policy, in how you design programs which are addressing transformations in shifting cultivation areas. And also some of these are at the operational level. So it helps the project teams, development workers, development practitioners in approaching these issues, so that what is suggested in there are also they're understandable and they can be acted upon by the communities. They can be taken down to the communities. So if you go through the publications, you'll find that it has a good blend. That's what we have tried to do, of not only putting in recommendations which are for the policymakers and the decision makers, but also through that to bring in changes which then helps the communities and brings about a better approach to transformations, or in even revitalizing shifting cultivation systems. I hope that answers your questions. I just saw one more question, Roshan, if I can touch on that in the chat. And this was on how, the different languages and translations of these resource books. I think from ICIMOD, we face that, or any of the organizations face this issue, that your clientele or the target groups might not necessarily be all English speaking. And these publications are in the English language. However, what we encourage, and we see whether we can do that or help support that, is translations into the local language. These translations we expect, or we hope that local partners, whether they're NGOs, the local governments, who can then help in translating these so that these are understandable, the messages are accessible for the local communities and the local, public and stakeholders. Thank you, Roshan.
Great.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Drupad, for that. Yes, we've come to the close of this, and let me bring in, I don't know, is Nigel connected yet or not? Okay.
I believe not, Roshan.
Okay, Liam, if you could please deliver the closing remarks on behalf of IFAD. Over to you.
Yes, with pleasure, absolutely. So first of all, it's been a really interesting conversation we've had, so I particularly enjoyed it. I think that we've all realized that the knowledge products we have discussed provide insights into navigating common pitfalls, adopting best practices when transforming shifting cultivation systems. So we hope that these can guide policymakers and practitioners in the region and beyond, of course, to navigate the common challenges in realizing an effective transition and to adopt best practices when transforming shifting cultivation systems, with the aim to contribute, of course, towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The way forward clearly is for such knowledge and guidelines to be operationalized through the incorporation into IFAD finance projects in the future of relevant recommendations, and we've just heard adequately translated practical recommendations in our different countries in the region and beyond. And clearly, together with our partners, we should also aim to facilitate related policy engagement. We should promote the adoption of the recommendations to bring about the required policy corrections. Now, in order to do this, perhaps it would be good after the launch of the event to have in the next few weeks an IFAD ICIMOD webinar focused specifically on how to incorporate these findings and guidelines into our operations and policy engagement going forward. So this is perhaps something, Roshan, we should start considering. Now, underlying all of our efforts, of course, remain the commitment, the knowledge, the dedication of our partners and country project teams to ensure the success of our achievements. And on behalf of IFAD, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to all of our partners for the continued support. And especially, this is a good opportunity to thank the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development for our excellent cooperation. So it's been a pleasure to be here, and over to you, Roshan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liam, and I'm really happy to hear those forward-looking comments and the proposal for a follow-up. Excellent. Let me now bring in Isabella Koziel, the Deputy Director General of ICIMOD. Over to you.
Thank you, Roshan, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm the new Deputy Director General of ICIMOD, but I also carry another hat, which is extremely relevant to this seminar today. I am a co-lead on Action Track 3 of the UN Food Systems Summit, which really tackles these issues of nature-based solutions moving forwards. So I've been listening very carefully today. So on behalf of ICIMOD, I would also like to thank IFAD for your cooperation and support in taking this really valuable piece of work forward. As one of the previous speakers said, this is really cutting edge. And for those of us who've been working in this area for a number of years, we've been coming across this issue of shifting cultivation for a long time, and clearly we have not resolved the issues. And what's so important about this piece of work that makes it different is that it's really trying to look at it from a solutions perspective. What is it that we can do moving forward against the very different context that we are continually finding ourselves moving forwards. And also, it really illustrates the value of a partnership between a knowledge organization such as ICIMOD and a delivery an investment organization such as IFAD. I somehow feel that it's the magic of that partnership that has delivered some of this creative thinking and tackling such a challenging cross-scale, cross-sectoral issue. So I do hope we can continue that partnership. We very much welcome the invitation to discuss this further in a webinar with IFAD. That's very encouraging. We should also be looking very much at the UNFSS and the various processes moving forward. It is moving at quite a pace right now, and I will be taking some of these findings into the Action Track 3. But of course, we also have the CBD and the COP26. And of course, how do we actually take this into practice, into policy in the field? These are very important issues that we welcome a further discussion on. Thank you very much for the webinar, and over to you, Roshan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for those closing remarks. And certainly, I think this gives us a new impetus for further strengthening our partnership with ICIMOD as we move forward. Thank you very much. I'd like to bring this session to a close, but I was wondering, Udayan, is it possible to activate everybody's camera so that we can see all our participants? Or am I asking for too much here?
Yeah, thanks, Roshan, but I think that might be a bit of a challenge at this time because we had already separated the speakers list and the attendee list. But at least we can have all speakers in the panel.
Okay,
at least
great. No, so technically we cannot do that, but I would really like to thank all the participants for engaging in this discussion. We had over 100 participants at one point. Which clearly shows the interest in this topic. So that's really good. And the links to these products, the knowledge products, the resource book and the policy briefs was put in the chat several times. So you can download those documents for your information. And we certainly will keep you informed about the follow-up work as things, evolve. Let me also thank all the speakers for their excellent presentations. It was a really interesting and informative set of presentations in a very short time. So thank you very much, and let's bring this to a close. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.